Yeah, and we're live. Guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. Remember, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today, let's talk about President Elon Musk. I like to call him Elon Musk because, to me, he's a felon, right? And I'm going to be reviewing an interview that a guy had with his father, Errol Musk, who had a lot of there was a lot of revelations about Musk's upbringing and some of the claims that he's made, especially as regards to whether or not he grew up with privilege. And his father, actually made a lot of these revelations. So we're going to be covering that, which just sheds a whole new light on the myth of the self-made man that Elon Musk has tried to make himself into. But before we get into that, did anybody see that clip of Elon Musk being in the Oval Office with Donald Trump, and Elon Musk's kid was there and he said something to Donald Trump, which was very weird. Now, the whole situation was very weird to begin with, but that thing that the kid said was even much more weirder. And I don't think there's been any reaction to that so far. So I'm just going to share that and take a look at it. Why did the kid say that? Where did the kid hear that from? Right. So let's go.
I'll ask Elon Musk to say a few words, and we'll take some questions. Elon, go ahead.
Sure. So at a high level.
Now, to begin with, I don't know if this is standard practice for an unelected official to be in the Oval Office in this manner, giving a briefing to the press. So this just seems very unorthodox. And then the kid, what's the kid doing there? Let's say serious political government function. Why is the kid there? In any other situation, a kid would not be allowed to be in that position. But somehow it's President Musk, and anything goes when it comes to the president.
You say, what is the goal of Doge, and I think a significant part of the presidency is to restore democracy.
Oh, so you heard what the kid said. You're not the president. You need to go away. And Trump just looked away from the kid. Now, this is a 4-year-old kid. Children are like sponges and they absorb everything around them. They absorb a lot of things and they regurgitate what they have absorbed. So someone must have told this kid. Of course, he knew this had something to do with the presidency because he looked over to Trump and said, "You are not the president." And I have said this before. And I said Elon Musk wants to be the emperor of the US. He wants to be the first emperor of the United States. And I said, if it ever gets to a contest between Trump and Musk, Musk is going to win. And Stanley has said it's not going to be possible because Trump is president. But we have seen that Musk has more leverage than Trump in this situation. Because why is he still there? Why is he doing things that Congress has not even approved? Trump has basically just giving him the keys to the US, giving him the keys to the White House to do whatever he wants to do. And now he's talking about Doge. Now Trump has called him to talk about, he's supposed to be talking about the cuts that they've made, but he's in a campaign mode, talking about what Doge is going to do. Tell us what it has done, how much has it cut, how many trillions has it cut. And so far, I don't think it's gone anywhere. But this thing that the kid said is very, very, very striking and very, very peculiar. And you need to ask yourself, where did the kid hear this thing from? I'm just going to play it again. Where did the kid hear this thing that he's repeating to?
A significant part of the presidency is to restore democracy.
You're not the president. You need to go away. And where is Vivek Ramaswamy? He and Musk were supposed to be running this thing, but somehow they put him somewhere. He's nowhere to be found. So yeah, I don't think it's not possible. Don't think it cannot happen. You don't think that Musk cannot usurp authority from Trump. He already has. He's essentially the president, and Trump is just a figurehead at this point in time. So maybe the US is now running like the British system, where you have the prime minister and you have the figurehead king or queen over there. So maybe that's what Trump is in this situation. Anyway, let's go over to the real meat of the conversation, which is about Errol Musk and what he revealed about his son. Yeah.
But without further ado, I introduce Errol Musk. I wanted to know, can you just tell me a little bit about where you're from and just a little bit about you, something that people might not know?
Where I'm from?
Yeah, where you're from.
I was born in Pretoria to a British woman and a South African man whose father had been British. And we were very poor, very, very poor people. My mother was an immigrant. I first grew up in Hillbrow, where the immigrants sort of congregated. My father spent 6 years in the war and he came back shell-shocked. So he was
He was a cryptographer, eh?
Sorry?
He was a cryptographer in the Second World War.
He was military intelligence, and he was very good at that. And he spent 6 years in that, all the way up to Germany. He saw a lot of terrible things, and he was very shocked by it, and never came right. He couldn't get a job after the war because he was really not physically suitable. His solace was drinking and smoking to try and always try and find something happy because he had seen a lot of terrible things. My mom told me afterwards. And I only found out in 1975, 30 years after the war, was the first time I was ever told that he was in military intelligence in the war, because it was a crime to tell before that. There was a 30-year, you're not allowed to say anything kind of thing. And yeah, I heard some terrible things about the circumstances he had. He was involved in a deception thing in Egypt during the war, and all but him and one of his friends were captured by the Italians of all people. And because they didn't wear insignia, the intelligence people didn't wear any badges or insignia. They wore khaki outfits, I think, but they never wore anything else. So they were all shot by the Italians and executed.
Were you close with your parents at all?
Very, very close to my parents.
So I think here Errol is giving a background of, he's giving his own background, that he grew up poor. Talk about being a child of immigrants from Britain to South Africa. Yeah. So even though he was poor, being a white person in South Africa at that time, you had to have had some privilege. So it wouldn't have been all bad for him.
Oh, very.
And your dad, did you have a good relationship with him?
Yeah, as good as it's possible. You know, I mean, we never had anything, you know, bad between us. I mean, he was a weak man, you know, very weak man. My mom, he survived because my mom worked hard. She had sewn sort of fighter aircraft fabric together before she came out from England on a refugee ship during the war. So she knew about that kind of stitching. So when after the war, she got into the fur trade where they sew leather together. So she became an incredibly good at that. So she joined a furriers group called Poland, which was the biggest furrier group in Johannesburg. Furs were the big thing. And then her cutter, there's a guy who cuts the fur because, you know, it's leopard and mink and all that sort of stuff. And then she sews it together and they make these incredible outfits. And Leslie Gerber, he won the Irish sweep in 1952. He won a lot of money, £10,000, and which was an enormous amount of money at the time. And, you know, so he started his own group, his own furrier called Derbers. Today, it's still the premier fashion house of Johannesburg, Derbers. So she worked for him, and she went with him, and so she made enough money to keep the whole family going. And finally, she left my father because, you know, for whatever reason, she couldn't handle it anymore. And she took me and my brother back to England. So we went to live in England when I was 10, came back when I was 12.
So it does seem that somewhere along the line, the family struck some fortune. I mean, £10,000 at that time is a whole lot of money. So even though Errol himself had grown up poor, fortune began to smile on them at a certain point in his growing up. And you are going to see later on as it goes how very early on in life he began to make so much money that it wasn't possible for Elon to have grown up poor, considering the wealth his father had at a young age.
And that was a good experience. My father, actually, while we were away, he was a prolific waster. He couldn't keep anything. He had no sense of anything after the war. He had no sense of planning. To him, life made no sense. You know, I never had money at school or anything like that. Throughout school, I started working for myself as a schoolboy, you know, going to the OK bazaars and trying to get jobs, which I did. But I soon realized, you know, I don't want to be a poor guy. I don't want to, as Elon said when he was about 12, you know, I remember somebody saying to Elon, you can't do this. When Elon said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this. And some older person said to Elon at the age of 12, the typical thing, you know, little boy, you're not going to find it so easy when you go
He
out
always thought
there.
he was going to be a
Elon said,
millionaire.
oh, no, I'm going to be a millionaire.
Yeah.
So it's going to be quite, not going to be a problem for me. And so I had much the same thing. I left school, university. I got a lot of scholarships. I was pretty much the first guy in class all through. And then I got these scholarships, and then I finished engineering. And then I, by chance, worked for a firm of consulting engineers from England who treated South Africans as second-class people. Anyway, they did a real...
Oh, that's rich. A class of English people treating South Africans as second-class people, while the white South Africans treated the black South Africans as third-class people? Okay.
bad job for the government here and were told to leave. And as it happened, one of the older men in the practice said to me, I was the most junior guy, I was 23. He said, do you want to join me and we buy this practice? I said, what? And I joined him. So we bought the practice. It wasn't long. And I found it was very suited me, this work.
So now, you know, even though he said he grew up poor, he had a lot of scholarships that saw him through school, so he didn't have to bother about his education. And now he's talking about buying a business. Where did the money come from to buy that business at such a young age?
And then it wasn't long before he came to me and said, few months, and he said, I can't do this because there's no regular income, you see. And he said he's got to have regular income. He was married, he had 2 children and so on. He wanted to get a job with UCOR, which was offered him a job. He was a very intelligent man. And so I said, fine. So he left. And it took me about 2 years to reach the level of most men who were in their late 40s, professional men. I was still about 24.
And how much did you make?
The first year I made over 100,000 rands, which would have been $150,000, was 1974.
So by 24, he was already making $150,000 a year. Now, the guy he bought this business with, for some reason, left the business. Does this seem familiar? Does this seem familiar like what his son did with Tesla, like kicking out the founders of Tesla? This might just be a pattern that's found in the family, in the Musk family. But it's striking that at the age of 22, coming from a background where he had nothing, to be able to be making $150,000 by the age of 24. From a business that he bought with someone, I don't know where the money came from to buy that business, and then the business partner somehow just left.
In today's money, it's about 10 million.
$10 million in today's money. That was what he was making at 24.
You're wealthy at a young age, eh?
Yes, I bought, well, I wouldn't, yeah, I mean, much wealthier than other people.
Yeah. Elon's mom was May Musk, right?
Yes.
When did you meet her?
I first met her at primary school when I got back from England. I went to this school in Pretoria, primary school. So I moved halfway in through standard 5, grade 7. And yeah, and she was in grade 10, grade 5, you know, standard 3. And yeah, so that's my first time I ever saw her. And then we went through high school together. I took out all her friends, but I never took her out until she was in matric. Then I took her out, and then we clicked quite immediately and went out for 6 years, and then we got married.
So, and you were married for about 10 years, right?
We were married for 10 years.
And why did you guys divorce? Was the
I'm
relationship
still trying to
rocky,
figure
or
that one out.
you don't know?
No, I don't know. I think we were, at the time, very much better off. Remember, my peers, the guys who were my age,
Yeah.
there was like, it's similar with Elon. They could not compete with me. They could not compete with me. We lived, when I was 26, I bought the home that is today the home of the European ambassador to South Africa in Waterkloof in Pretoria. I was 26. It's probably one of the 5 finest homes in Pretoria. it before the European ambassador lived there, it was the headquarters of the United Nations for the Southern Hemisphere. So I
So at 24, he was already making $10 million in today's money. At 26, he had one of the finest houses in South Africa, in Pretoria, South Africa. Yet somehow down the line, Elon will claim that they grew up in poverty. It just doesn't add up.
owned that when I was 26, and we lived there. We had a chef. Even the chef we had was even borrowed once for Henry Kissinger. When Henry Kissinger came to South Africa to sort out the Rhodesian question, they borrowed our chef for 3 weeks. So it wasn't typical to have a chef and live like that.
You were living a good life together, yeah.
Yeah, very different to the people of my age. So my May had a twin sister, and her husband, they lived in a little cottage. They didn't go anywhere. We lived overseas. We came back. It was very hard for her. In some ways, she was also pushed into a world of women who were colleagues of mine, like Los Holkersner was 20 years older than me. I'm now on everyday personal friends with Sol Kersner's son, Brandon. And he's an incredibly nice guy, just as smart as his father. And so in those days, it was, well, of course, I saw Sol as much senior to me, but those were the people we mixed with. And so her own level of, her own age of people, she didn't mix with. And somehow it kind of got to a point where, we split up. And I gave her the home in Natal next to the Oppenheimers there, their holiday home. And she went to live there. And it surprised me when I did go down to see my daughter who stayed with her, because my son stayed with me in Pretoria. And then, I would go down and see May. And it surprised me the people that she had as friends, because they were very, very much lower deck than the friends we'd always had. They were just people I would not normally have.
Plebs, eh?
Plebs, yeah.
You see his very elitist lifestyle. I mean, very elitist upbringing. His wife, after they had divorced, would now start fraternizing with people they would normally not even have any interactions with. And I'm guessing these are white people, not to even think of the black people in South Africa. So is this any surprise that Elon Musk wants to replicate apartheid South Africa currently now in the US? It's no surprise. This is a family tradition. This is something that's been in the family for a very long time. And it shows. So, still tying it back to Elon's claim that he grew up in poverty, which is bollocks, based on what his father is doing. What his father is saying now. There's no way that his father could have lost all that wealth. We've not even gotten the bits of the emerald mines. And, the man is just chill and saying all these things that contradict so many of the things that his son has said about his upbringing. And,
Plebs. Not people I would normally have ever spent a minute with.
And when you guys got divorced, I think I read that you got custody of Elon, right? For a bit.
Yeah, when we got divorced, the custody of the two boys was with me, and the custody of my daughter, which was silly. I don't know why I didn't worry about that, but she was only 5. So Tosca went with her mother. The boys' custody was to me.
And what was that time of your life like? I want to know, what was it like spending time with your kids? Can you tell me some stories about them especially Elon, when he was a kid?
They brought all their friends on weekends because we had a horse stud in Sandton. So we had we always kept about 6 of our own. And then we'd also take in other people's horses, thoroughbreds, So it's at times we had up to 14 thoroughbreds that some I was looking after, others belonged to me. And we had a menage, which is where
14. Now, this doesn't strike me as a home that is poor, a home that is struggling. Not in the least. This was the sort of upbringing. This was the sort of upbringing that Elon Musk had. He's always had privilege. So this myth of the self-made man is a myth as far as anyone is concerned, as far as the facts are concerned, right? Yes, of course, he's a smart businessman. You don't convert whatever little you have to become the richest man on earth without having some skills, some measure of intelligence of your own, some capabilities, right? But you didn't start from zero. You didn't start from nothing. You had the privilege. You had the access, and those things are much more important at times than even talent. He had the opportunity to be in places that he could be helped. He had the education. He had a connection. So all those things come into play when you're talking about how he's become incredibly successful right now.
You can jump, show jump. Full menage built by Mickey Lowe.
Yeah.
He was an Olympic show jumper. And so having the boys and that motorbikes, the first motorbikes I bought for Elon and Kimball, they were 7 and 8, 7 years old and 8 years old. I bought them each a real motorbike. When I talked to Kimball recently about it,
7 and 8, he bought them a real motorbike. Nah, not poor.
he said to me, Dad, that was insane. These were real motorbikes. I mean, you could go 100 kilometers an hour on them, on the main road if you wanted to. And because they were fully set up. Anyway, so on the farm, or we call it a farm, it was a horse stud, the boys could have a great time. So when their friends came, I never saw them, So as a bachelor father, I could more or less date and, girlfriends could come over. The house was enormous. We had every single thing. We had a full-size snooker room. We had every possible. We had a gymnasium. We had a jacuzzi. We had a tennis court, everything. So I never really saw the kids and the boys. All I was needed for was, Dad, it's nearly supper time. Let's head to our restaurant, which was long.
These people were living like kings in their own personal palace. That's the sort of upbringing that Elon Musk had. They had their own restaurant. The house was so huge that he didn't even have contact with his kids' friends. They didn't even come in contact because the house was so big. And the kids basically raised themselves because he was busy being a bachelor and bringing women over. So they basically raised themselves and they only ever needed him when it was time for what? Lunch, supper, or to give them money or what? So he provided everything materially for them. But I don't think he provided the sort of fatherhood that they needed. And that may be some of the things that's at the root of what Elon Musk has become today. There's something missing with the man.
Longhorn, which we owned. So where they would, to this day, still tell me that was the best food they ever had in their lives, even though Kimball owns, with Elon, but Kimball owns 3,500 restaurants now. 3,500.
3,500 restaurants owned by one person. Insane.
It's hard to believe, but they spread out over 60 different countries, like 50 states, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Bahamas and so on. But there's, that's what he does. He gets around to them in a Lear Bombardier jet.
And what kind of things would Elon get up to on the farm?
Well, like I say, they were very responsible. They would saddle up the horses, go out riding. Those days, the Sandton Kyalami area was grassland, so it was easy to go for rides and things. And it was very safe. There was no crime to speak of, And so I hardly ever saw them. The friends would come. The second book that was written on Elon, called Risking It All by Michael Flismus, he interviews many of those boys, and they talk about how I was like their second father, and these boys, their friends, and how they would have this great time. The only time we ever left the house, we had a home on the Vaal River. We had a plot there, and we had a big 22-foot ski boat with a 300 horsepower Mer Cruiser in it. We used to barefoot ski, so we would go down to the Vaal, and that's the only time we ever left the house, is to go skiing, and water skiing. And then, so what the boys only ever wanted me for was to go out and eat, and eating time. And eating time for me, it was great because it was just a case of steaks and burgers, and I never had to worry, because it was like ideal for me in many ways,
It just unashamedly expresses how great it was for him to have, abandoned his responsibilities to his children in terms of raising them by simply just providing for them all the material things that they need or they needed. and that was great for him. I mean, he could have his bachelor life while his children just basically raise themselves. I mean, maybe that's why Elon is a very weird, not very well adjusted kid today.
But I never had to tell them, do this, do that, don't do this, do this. You know, they sort of ran their own lives.
They kind of just did their own thing, eh?
Yes.
And did he ever get into any trouble? Because I want to hear some
Trouble?
funny stories. Like, I mean, as a kid, right? I have a friend who,
You know, it's very funny that he hasn't been even able to say much about his kids. All the conversations been centered around himself. Even though the questions, the interview is very clearly wants to know about the growing up this of these kids, but he can't say anything about how they grew up because he wasn't present in their lives, and it's very very apparent. And he just goes back to talking about himself into himself, his life.
he wanted to study to become like a rocket engineer, and he at school made these rockets.
Yeah.
And the one day he took the pipe that he was building the rocket out of, and he plugged both ends and then drilled
Interesting.
into it, and it exploded, and he pretty much lost one of his eyes.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So
Yes.
I want to know, he must have been doing stuff like that all the time.
Yes, we did have a situation where a boy, they used to mix zinc dust and sulfur to make the rockets. They did build small rockets, as you say, just like you're talking about. And one boy, they used to mix zinc dust with sulfur and add it to the basically gunpowder mix. And this thing blew up and took off 2 of his fingers and left him with a hole in his left hand.
One of Elon's friends.
Yes, Louis. His name was Louis. He eventually became director of Sunderland Observatory.
Oh.
So he continued in that field.
One of the things Elon's always spoken about is the fact that he was very badly bullied at school.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't bullied.
He
at school.
wasn't bullied at school.
No.
So Elon makes a claim, and his father just says, "Nah, that didn't happen." Elon made the claim that they grew up poor. His father said, "Nah, we were in opulence. He didn't grow up poor." Elon made the claim that he was bullied. The father's like, "Nah, he wasn't bullied."
So is
That's
he
not true at
lying
all.
when he says that? Or
Well, South African boys, let's look at the South African scene. I came back from England where, first of all, I left South Africa in standard 3 or grade 5. And my experience at school was that if you opened your mouth, you got caned.
you got smacked, yeah.
No, you got caned. With a whip cane. The girls would be hit with quite a heavy ruler on their open palms. They were standard. It was typical to be caned 3 times a week when I was at school in South Africa. Even as a young primary school kid, kids were not well looked upon in South Africa. You were treated like I wasn't allowed where we lived. We only had 2 rooms in a boarding house. Boarding house had a lounge for the people who lived in the boarding house. But as a child, as a boy, I wasn't allowed in the lounge. I was never allowed in a lounge. It was not allowed.
Yeah.
So it was different in South Africa. Kids had a hard time.
You're saying it was more normal back then. And even
I
when
wouldn't call it
Elon
normal.
was at school.
I'd say, based on how it is today, we're sitting here on a carpet that costs a great deal of money. My kids play with plasticine on this carpet or whatever. I don't care. But in those days, I wasn't even allowed to stand on a carpet.
Yeah.
When I went to England, I found it was different. So when we got to England, I found I actually liked children in the 50s. So it was very strange for me to be in a place where children were actually liked, loved. And many things were set up for children in England. So, you just couldn't believe it. You couldn't do anything wrong. If you went to the corner shop on Fridays, all the kids got threepence, and then the little packets, quarter pound of sweets were all packed out for the kids to come and get their packet of sweets on a Friday. With the threepence was a coin with a hole in it, copper coin with a hole in it. And so England was an absolute eye-opener to me. And then we came back to South Africa. So on the first day that we came back to South Africa, I went to the school in Pretoria, English-speaking school. I didn't know anybody, and I wore sandals because my parents were still not terribly well off, and I didn't have the black toe caps and all that sort of stuff. I was challenged on the very first day to 10 rounds in the boxing ring. The school had a boxing ring set up in the little school hall, and I was challenged to 10 rounds by the school, I would say bully or champion, a real animal. And I was shocked because I didn't know anybody. And of course, you can imagine how I felt. I can still see that day. It's like it happened yesterday. The headmaster offered to be referee. Shall I let that sink in for a bit?
Yeah.
So the headmaster, Mr. Duplessis, he offered to be the referee. And I knew nobody, and I was put into a boxing ring on the first day at school with a thug. That's South Africa. That's coming from England. I couldn't believe it. So Elon went to school in South Africa later on. And so you have to see the difference of what life was. So from the moment he stepped into school in South Africa, particularly high school, it's dick measuring. You have to play rugby. If you don't play rugby, it's a problem. The teachers are not very smart. They know more about rugby than what the subject that they teach. So that's, if you do well, you get beat. They wait for you after school. They hit you with their sacks, their satchels or whatever. That's standard. I don't call that bullying. That's just how it is.
That is bullying.
Bullocks. That is bullying. So see how this man is normalizing dysfunction. So in this case, Elon was actually right that he was bullied as a kid, and his father was just chalking it up to it's life. That's the way life is, and I see this sort of behavior with many right wing people where they just accept dysfunctional things and say that's the way of the world, is the way life is. You just have to no, you don't have to accept things like that. You don't have to accept being bullied and say it's the way things were. There's a reason why those things change, or why they changed, or why we continue trying to improve upon things in human societies, because nothing is perfect. But we could as well just say that the way cavemen lived, that was the way things are, nothing needed to change. So this man very clearly just described his son having been bullied, he himself having been bullied, and he thinks that's a normal thing to have happened.
Bullying, though.
No, it's not bullying. Because
like
sometimes
hazing.
they're the same size as you.
Yeah.
Bullying is where a big person picks on a little person who can't defend himself. So the boys learn to defend themselves. My boys learn to defend themselves. On one occasion, when Elon was only in standard 6 or grade 8, a little boy, this is again typically South African, a little boy's father in the same grade had committed suicide. I was told by the headmaster afterwards. And this little boy went home or wherever they lived, and he actually discovered his father hanging, which is pretty rough. But in South Africa, it's pretty normal.
I know someone that came
That's
home
pretty normal in
and
South
their
Africa.
father was hanging too.
Yeah. So it's pretty normal, you know. So
That's not normal. Nothing is normal about seeing your own father hanging from the ceiling and you say that's normal.
of course, it was talking point at school, you know, and this little boy didn't feel very good about it, I'm sure. And Elon made the mistake of saying to this little boy, your father was stupid. It's not a thing you should actually say, you know.
Never. No.
Elon had a tendency to say that. He still does. And in fact,
Yeah, because he never grew up. He's still that kid who doesn't know how to behave properly in public, who doesn't know social etiquette or how to interact with other people, and just says very weird, cringe things, right? So someone described him as the smartest 15-year-old boy they've ever seen. And I think he's stuck in that Peter Pan phase where he's still mentally a child. Yeah, a very, very brilliant child, but he's a child anyway.
America recently, you know, in the recent years, it's quite normal in America to call people a douchebag, a poeslap in Afrikaans. Now, if I went to the local night spots here in this West Coast area and said to one of the Afrikaans guys to his face, there's a poeslap, I would probably wind up in hospital for at least a week or two. For sure. My nose would never be the same again, and my cheekbone would probably be crushed. That's right now. And so would I do that? Would you do that?
Probably
No,
not.
I don't think so. You could do it in homosexual territory in Camps Bay or something. You can't do it here. By grade 8, Elon stood a good, nearly 6 foot, I'd say, maybe 5'9" or something. And this boy was probably about 5 foot. He looked very small compared to Elon anyway. And he was a stocky little guy, and he pushed Elon down the stairs. Elon went down 2 flights of stairs from the second floor to the ground floor. He was like severely injured. Then this boy ran down and apparently found a piece of wood or something, and started hitting Elon with a piece of wood. Elon was in hospital for 2 weeks. So that was, I had to take Elon out of that school. I wanted to charge it. I wanted to go to the police with it. And when the headmaster, I went to the police, Randburg police, and they were skeptical. And then when the police came with me to the school and everything, the headmaster explained the circumstances. The police said they will not make a case out of this because what Elon said was sufficient cause, you know.
Do you think the fact that Elon had Asperger's made him feel a bit like of an outcast at school?
No. I think he felt a bit of an outcast in some ways. You know, he always went to school in a Rolls Royce, and we always had a private airplane, and he traveled a great deal overseas.
He went to school in a Rolls Royce, had a private plane. Nothing like what Elon has claimed. This is crazy. The amount of privilege this guy had to have grown up in. Went to school in a Rolls Royce.
So it wasn't easy for him to fit into the peer group, especially at an ordinary government school.
So he was so privileged that even other whites in South Africa were not enough for him to fit in. That was how privileged this kid was. So privileged that other white people were not even good enough to be in his company.
Where these boys didn't have things like that, didn't do that kind of thing.
Mm.
And so he should have gone to a private school, would have been better, like St. Scythians, which I thought of putting him in. But they didn't want to go to a private school because they went to a private primary school before May and I divorced. And they thought it was like a concentration camp. They described for a Waterkloof Waterkloof Preparatory School. It's a private school in Victoria.
Mm.
They thought of this. They said it's like a German concentration camp, especially for the live-in boys.
And when did you realize that Elon had Asperger's?
No, I never heard of Asperger's. I only heard about it when he went on Saturday Night Live and somebody said he's got Asperger's. No, I never
So you
heard
didn't
of
know that he had
Asperger's.
Asperger's?
Oh, this man is funny. See, people try to blame Elon's bad behavior on some weird sociological disorder, whether you call it autism or Asperger's. And his father's like, nah, he was just a weird kid. He didn't have Asperger's. It's crazy that people try to make excuses for Elon's bad behavior. Like when he did the Nazi salute, and people are saying, "Oh, he did that because that's how people with autism express themselves." And I've never seen anyone with autism actually do the Nazi salute. I've never seen anyone with autism be so socially unaware as to use such offensive things, if that's what it means to have autism or have Asperger's. Nah, those are just excuses that are made for Elon Musk because somehow, because he's so wealthy, he can get away with anything.
No, I never heard of it. And it said something about you focus intensely on one subject. What I did have was, I knew that Elon was like that. My brother's like that. I saw from a very early age that he would focus very intensely, just like my 7-year-old and 8-year-old now does the same, who calls himself a gamer. He's 8 years old. He calls himself a professional gamer. My son of now, the 8-year-old that I've got, he's nearly 8.
And do you think that Elon enjoyed his childhood in South Africa?
Oh, yes. If you read, he says
Why
no, he
would-
didn't, which is not true. He's just looking for sympathy on that side. I don't know. But if you read Flismus's book,
Of course, he enjoyed his time in South Africa. He grew up in opulence. He lived in a palace. He went to school in a Rolls Royce. He traveled the world in private planes. Of course, he did. And his father was like, "Nah, I don't know. I don't know why he's claiming otherwise. He's just trying to gain sympathy." And that's his this. Despite the fact that he's the wealthiest man in the world, he has this compulsive need to be liked. He has this compulsive need to be sympathized with, and that's what's driving much of his behavior. This father is just like, nah, he had a really good time.
which is a South African sports writer who wrote the second book, Risking It All. He interviewed the friends, Theo and Danny and so on, Elon's close friends that he kept all the years. You know, he invited them both to his 30th birthday, which he held at a castle in England for a week when he turned 30. Theo and Danny came. So he was very close with them. And Danny, in Christmas's book, and Theo said, life with me was just terrific. It was water skiing, motorbikes, horse riding, and steaks and hamburgers.
And did you guys ever confide in each other, right? Like, as me growing up, I've had a lot of my own issues. I've suffered through addiction. I didn't do very well at school. And for me, my dad has always been the person, and my mom, but obviously I'm talking to you now, you're Elon's dad, right? So my dad was always the person that when I really felt like my back was up against the wall and I was in trouble and I had nowhere else to turn, I would always turn to my mom and my dad, right? Was there any ever moments where Elon really confided in you or needed some advice? And what were those moments?
No, I was very hands-on in that respect. I mean, we held a lot of discussions, you know, about everything, because I'm very academic. I mean, my big thing right now is I've just spent 2 weeks in Dubai in December with the Sheikh as a guest of the Sheikh of Dubai, where they asked me recently, what are we going to do next? And I happened to say right in the beginning of December, I said, well, we need to study space-time travel and gravity, and we need to solve fusion if we expect to go forward in the world, to actually experience the popular vision of the future that we, otherwise in 100 years from now, we'll still be doing exactly the same. And so that was taken up by the press because all the people were there, and this went from one meeting to another. And now it's now all over the world that this institute is going to be established. And it's going to study these things, and we're going to be in Dubai. We're actually going to build a 100-story high building. It's going to be the most exclusive building in Dubai. It's going to house the institute, which they want to call the Musk Institute.
Yeah.
The building's going to be called the Musk Tower. It's all over the world. And everybody knows about it. It's taken 2 months. And that's simply because that's something that is in my mind. And we always so as they were small, we were always talking about all these kind of things. And I've even, of course, said to Elon, not now, long ago, rockets are not the way to go. Rockets are okay, but it's not the way to go. We can't do interplanetary travel with rockets.
I'm talking more emotional things, though, in terms of because Elon, right, he is a genius.
So you're trying to get this man to talk about his child in a human way. And he's like, nah, we just talked about rockets. We talked about science. We talked about money. We talked about all those things. He didn't raise his kids, even though he had custody of them. He didn't raise them. They literally raised themselves. And that's why I would say Elon is it's like a very immature, dysfunctional child. He didn't have the emotional molding that the parents were supposed to mold the child into. He was just floating. Obviously, a very intelligent child, but who was just floating, and that's why he's the way he is today. And that's why I was like, nah, no emotional connection.
He's undoubtedly a genius, right? He's obviously got flaws as well, but he's had a very interesting life and a very unusual upbringing, right? So it seems like when he was at school, he feels he didn't fit in. He also had Asperger's, and from what he said, I don't think he felt that connected to you guys growing up. But
that's not true.
You don't think so? Like, what kind of things would he confide in you? Did he ever tell you about things that he was struggling with or dealing with? Because
he never struggled academically, so there was
no. I'm talking about emotionally.
Girls,
Hasn't this man proven that he didn't have any emotional connection with his children other than providing for them materially? It's-
would be a problem. One time, they were both very slow. Kimball was very good looking. Kimball, to my mind, Elon was very good looking. Handsome guy, if you wanted to be. Kimball was beautiful. He's better looking than average, better looking than Brad Pitt, better looking than Rob Lowe or Brad Pitt. Kimball, still is. And so Kimball didn't have much problem. And Kimball would sometimes bring girls home, pretty girls, and I would go like, oh my God. And Kimball I'd say, she's lovely. He'd say, oh no, Dad, I don't like her. So I'd say, Kimball, you lucky bugger. But anyway,
And Elon?
Elon would not. He would try. He was more shy. And on one occasion, he did invite a girl out to go.
That's why he's impregnating anything in skirts now, because he's trying to relieve his teenage years when he couldn't get girls. Now that he has the power, he's impregnating all of his female staff. He's just hitting anything in skirts.
The movies with him. And the arrangement was I would pick them up, take them. Of course, he had no way of getting to the cinema.
Yeah.
Stayalon, which I happen to be the consulting engineer of Stayalon in Pretoria, and at that time, and in fact in Johannesburg, Stayalon as well. And I drove him and the girl to the cinema, had everything there, ice rink, all that sort of stuff, which we did. And enticing, you see. And then his parents were her parents were going to pick them up. So I got a call from him, from a call box, to say that the girl had been picked up, but they'd left him at the cinema.
Why?
I don't know. I couldn't believe it. I said, you're joking. You serious? So I drove in and picked him up alone. So I don't know why people do things like that. So he was, as his first wife has said on interviews, that when she first met him, he said to her, I've got some terrific books on rocketry. Would you like to come to my dorm? They were in dormitory together at university to see my books on rocketry. That's actually what she told the interviewer.
That was his pickup line.
Well, he actually did want to show his books on rocketry.
Yeah, but that was his way of trying to show interest in that.
So he's never, Kimball is somebody that makes friends instantly, and everybody thinks they've got a friend for life. Of course, Kimball couldn't care less about you, I think. But to anybody else, once you've met Kimball, you're definitely under the impression that this guy loves me, because that's how he behaves. People have come to me with Elon over the years and said to me, when he's an adult even, especially, when they're leaving and say, oh, I'm on my way now, they whisper to me, your son doesn't like me at all. This is now Elon. And then I'd say, why? Why do you say that? This has happened a few times. And then they'd say, no, he doesn't like me. And then I'd go to Elon and say, so-and-so thinks you don't like him. And Elon will come over, oh, no, why? Why do you think that? He tries best to make up for it,
Dude, because he's awkward. Elon's father is much more interested than even Elon himself. And he speaks way better than Elon, who stutters through everything that he says.
It's just that you'll be talking, this Asperger thing applies. You'll be talking to Elon, and to a certain extent, I was the same. I've mellowed. You'll be talking to him, and you'll see his mind's not on what you're saying anymore.
He'll just go somewhere else.
And then suddenly, while you're telling him something, he'll just stand up and say, I've got to go now, and walk away. Sorry, I've got to go now. He won't be rude. He'll say, sorry, I've got to go now, and he'll walk away while you're in mid-sentence. And that is an issue.
What's it been like for you, right, as his father, to watch him go from the kid you raised to being literally the most successful person in human history? I mean, it must be insane from your perspective.
Well, we've always been doing things, you see. So even when I was a young professional guy or whatever, we were always doing things, we were always doing things.
But was there a moment where you realized, like, wow, my son has really made it?
Well, the money thing wasn't new to me, because by the time I was 30
course.
myself in South Africa,
Yeah.
people have often asked me, and I think you asked me, why am I still here? Or I think people have asked me that a lot. And by the time I was 30 in South Africa, the home I lived in was our primary home, is today the home of the European ambassador, which you can imagine is probably a fine home. Before that, it was headquarters of the UN. So that was our home. We had our own chef. We had several servants. The house had 8 bedrooms, and it was built in 1927. It was very beautiful. It was designed by Herbert Baker.
Do you know how much of a narcissist this man has to be to look at his son, who is like the wealthiest man in the world today, and still think that it's not so different from me in terms of achievements. When I was 30, I already had this, I already had that. Dude cannot even comprehend anyone being like more exceptional than himself. And I think this is where Elon gets that trait from too. So self-absorbed, so egotistical, so narcissistic, right? Tells a lot.
It was an incredible home. And our garden we had air rights over the city, so nobody could build anything in front of us. And I never even went down into our garden. It was too big. We actually were on like well over an acre.
Yeah. So
in
you've
Waterford.
always been wealthy.
Yes, I had a twin-engine aeroplane, probably
Yeah.
my fifth by that time.
But I
By the
mean,
time I was 30, we had an ocean-going yacht. We
It's
had
a
place
different
in the
level
bush.
of wealth, though. Even though you were wealthy,
Yes.
I mean, Elon
You
is
see, but
the wealthiest.
my wealth, I counted wealth to a certain extent, I still do, not in how much money I've got in the post office,
Mm.
but in what I've got. And it puzzles me, and in a certain way, it still applies, because Elon and Kimball have always known what it is, although they do have private jets, and several of them. But because they've always had all these things, they don't have a great yearning to have these things.
Mm.
You see what I mean? And so they don't have many things. Their money's tied up in stocks and new investments and
Yeah.
stuff like
Yeah, I mean, I think this explains why Elon Musk wants to become emperor of the US. I mean, if he's grown up with wealth all his life, he's lived a very privileged life, he's the wealthiest man in the world. What's next for him? What excites him? He could literally buy anything he wants, he could have anybody he wants, he could make anything happen that he wants to. So, what next but to become emperor? That's why he's doing what he's doing currently. That's why he's basically usurped Trump's authority. Trump basically just sold out to him. That's why he's doing all this. Nothing excites him anymore. There's no challenge, nothing materially to challenge him as a human being because he's attained almost anything materially that you want to attain.
that. For me, in those days, it was, what's the point of me going around saying I've got X stock in Barlow's and I live in a flat
Yeah.
where I could live in a fine home and go to the bush on weekends or to my Vaal property
Yeah.
on weekends? Why on earth would I want to be able to live in a 2-bedroom flat and look at my stock portfolio for fun? That's not my idea of fun. It still isn't. In fact, I've just recently been received a lot of money for something, and the first thing I'm going to do is upgrade my aircraft that I have. I want to upgrade the existing aircraft that I've got. Why? Why would I want to sit with something that means nothing to me and something I use all the time, and I'm using something less? So as far as your question is concerned, we've always been in that position.
Again,
I have a role.
reiterating the fact that Elon didn't grow up poor, he didn't grow up in need or in want, and his father very clearly said that he doesn't understand why Elon is making that claim, probably because he wants sympathy. And why does he want to make himself seem so poor? Because he wants to inflate his achievements. He wants to tell you that he's a self-made man. He wants to tell you that there's this rags to riches kind of story, from grass to grace. He did it all by himself with his intelligence. But we can very clearly see that his father's wealth, influence, and connection had a whole lot to do with the success that Elon has become today. It wasn't just him being smart. Of course, if you're not smart, no matter how much wealth your parents have, you may not be able to turn it into anything. But the fact that he was able to turn the wealth that he had into much more shows that, yeah, he does have some skills. That's uncontestable, that's undoubtable. But is he a genius? Is he someone who wouldn't have, is he someone who would have been in this position he is now if he had a different background? I don't think so. I don't think if Elon was any less fortunate that he would have, or if he was much more less fortunate that he would be in the position he's in today. I think that would have been a totally different reality for him because of the kind of exposure, the kind of people he would have been exposed to, the kind of access that he would have had would have been totally different. And and this tracks with what the research has shown. People who are born wealthy most of the time stay wealthy. People who are born poor most of the time still poor. So
Rolls Royce, which is in the garage at the moment, having some work done on it. I have a Bentley here. These are things that matter to me. Bentley was bought for me last year by Elon, as a matter of fact. He asked me whether he should send me a Tesla. I said, there's no charging stations here. So he said, what would you like? I said, well, I'd like a Bentley. So he sent me this Bentley.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about you, right, and your relationships over the years. So I've got a little bit of a timeline over here. So you married May Musk, and then you guys got divorced a little while later.
In 1980.
After that, you meet Heidi Bezuidenhout, who has a daughter, Jana Bezuidenhout, from a previous marriage, who was very young at the time. And then from there, you guys divorce, you and Heidi divorce. And then a couple of years later, I think it was kind of out of nowhere,
14 years later,
you had a kid with your ex-wife's daughter, who you kind of raised, right?
not right, no.
But she was around as a kid when you guys were married.
Yes, Haida and I married, it's Haida Marie. We married in 1992.
Yeah.
And she was much younger than me, Haida. It didn't really work out. So we divorced after 2 years. But in those 2 years, we had a daughter, Alexandra. Haida and I had a good relationship, but once we married, like all these things, didn't really pan out too well. And I didn't really get on. Our family, very Afrikaans, and I really struggled with that. And we got out of it. And she went on and married another man. I never saw her for much of her, except when I saw my daughter, which was about every month I'd go and see our daughter. And they were really difficult, so I'd like take her for an ice cream, you know. And this went on for about 3 years. And then Haida got divorced from this guy, and we bumped into each other we got divorced in 94, and about 98, we saw each other again more on let's go out for supper and all that kind of stuff. And turned out she'd had a very bad marriage with this other guy, a policeman who had problems. And we started seeing each other again, and we remarried in 99, you see. But in the meantime, when Haida so I knew her daughter, Jana, in that first 2 years, when Jana was about 6 or 7 or 8 or something like that. And I had very little to do with, and then even then I can remember the children, because my friend said to me, why are you marrying somebody with all these children? But I did everything I could for them. Didn't work out. So, but when I remarried Haida, she'd already placed her 3 children into the state custody, state home custody. Do you understand? She made them wards of the state.
Why?
She couldn't afford to keep them. The policeman didn't have the income
Okay.
to look after.
So she gave her kids up to.
Well, I don't like to use it as strong as that. She had to do something. And so the kids went in as wards of the state, and they went to the Louis Botha Children's Home. It's a terrible, it's a really nice place, because as Rotarians, we used to sort of support it, you know. It's obviously, you know, a wonderful thing, like Boys Town, you know. Anyway, so when I remarried Haida, her children weren't with us.
Okay.
So the first 2 years of our marriage again,
So all he's just trying to say, all he's trying to explain, he's trying to explain why it is okay for him to have married his wife's daughter, who also happens to be the half sister of his own daughter. That's the crazy thing this old man is trying to explain. Oh, dear.
again uh, from 99, 2001. It was just Ali, and then in 99, Rose was born.
Not even married. Why he had not one but two kids with his own stepdaughter, because that lady is his daughter's sister and his previous wife's daughter. Not one. One you could have said, oh, maybe it was an accident that happened, something happened, but two is very, very deliberate.
So we had a
Yeah.
little baby, and just me, Hader, and we would try and see the children when we were allowed to, her children, which was not often, once a month or something. And then we decided that we're going to apply to have them taken out of the children's home, which was a very hard thing to do. And because the state didn't want to take a chance. So it was people sitting around tables, huge tables, 20 people, and you have to try and convince them. So they agreed to let us take the children out one by one. And that even involved going to a court and being in front of a magistrate and all sorts of things. That's me, because it was placed on I had to prove that I was now prepared to do this. You
To
see
take
me?
care of them.
Because the state didn't want to screw around. Yeah, so we got the one out, the oldest one, Herman, and then we got, we actually then got the other little boy out. He was also a boy. They were concerned about the girl, Jana, so she came out last. So we got them out in about 2002. And around about 2002, Elon had his first child, and he contacted us. We were obviously still in a lot of contact, and they were doing quite well. By 2002, Elon had made nearly $200 million with PayPal. And so he invited us over. Of course, they paid for me now. They had a lot of money. They paid for us to come over, to come and meet his little boy who was 3 months old. On the way there, we arrived in Raleigh in North Carolina, and the airline called me off the plane to tell me that they need to tell me something. I need to make a call to my children to tell me that the little boy had died the night before, the baby, Nevada. He passed away. My son's, Elon's son. That was very horrific situation. And they were, everybody was in a state, and they said, Dad, we don't think you should come. Elon, turn around, go back to South Africa. We don't want to see anybody. Of course, we didn't turn around. So we continued, and Elon at that point was renting the top floor of the Beverly Wilshire, the penthouse, which is the one used in Pretty Woman, but it's very, very big. It can house about 4 big families. It's like incredible, palatial. He was renting this place for about, I don't know, 150,000 rands a night or something. And we stayed there, and we tried to pull ourselves together. It was very, very difficult. The child had just died in his cot, you see, something like that. And it was terrible. And anyway, so when we were due to leave, Kimball was living in Colorado, and Kimball came down to LA and we all met for the last night. And then I've still got a photograph of that. I was looking at it just the other day. In fact, it's just been sent to me because CakeNet TV asked me for a picture of the whole family. And we had this photograph taken of all of us that last night before we were due to come back to South Africa, which I can show you. And they said, we don't want you to go back to South Africa. We want you to stay. So we said, what? They said, yes, you're not to go back. Nobody must go back. So we after much arguing and everything, the flights, of course, were lost, and we stayed. And Elon, my Hader was not keen on staying because she was very Afrikaans. She had a lot of Afrikaans family and all that kind of stuff. And they, as you know, they're very close together and all that. So we stayed. They immediately bought us a house in Beverly Hills. At the time,
this story is so long. This story of how he had kids. He had two kids with his own stepdaughter. It's just too long. But anyway, he passes the point. I mean, something's weird. Something's weird with the family. There's no way you're going to um, explain such a situation where a kid that was born to your own ex-wife, who also happens to be your own daughter's sister, and then you had two kids with her. It's it's insane.
In today's money, it was 70 million they paid for the house in Beverly Hills for us. 70 million rands, anyway, not dollars.
Mm.
Maybe more, maybe 80 million rands. They paid for this incredible house. So we moved into that, and eventually, Beverly Hills is not. It's not a place. Not great, you know. It's okay. It's not exactly the most friendly place.
Mm.
And so we moved from there to a 2-acre plot in Malibu, where we were, Hader said she felt more at home. And we continued there. We put all the kids initially in Beverly Hills High School, 90210. You know, the one that's the movies, the TV shows.
Yeah.
The older kids went to that. Younger kids went to the primary school. And then we put them all in Malibu High School. And it didn't go well. We tried. I joined SpaceX as one of the early people in SpaceX, only 10 of us,
Mm.
and renovating an old warehouse to start SpaceX,
Yeah.
which today they turned into something so amazing. They made a movie there called Iron Man. But anyway,
And if you remember, another myth that Elon Musk has said was that when he was building his companies, he was so broke, he was living in a very tiny space, was living in his office space because he didn't have money for rent. But everything his father said so far has disproving all that, has proven that all that's a myth. His father's always had wealth, always had money. Elon went to school in a Rolls Royce. They lived in a palace. They had personal chefs. They had gardens. They had swimming pools. They had everything. They had private planes. Everything you could think of. So he grew up in opulence, which opened up opportunities and doors for him for whatever he's become so far. So that's one side of the myth making. This other side was that Elon said he was bullied, which, according to his father says he wasn't bullied, but what he described very clearly showed that Elon was bullied. I don't know why he thought bullying is a normal thing that kids just have to go through. Just thinks that's a normal thing. So, it's a weird family, and I can see where many of Elon's problems are coming from. I mean, they are unresolved childhood issues, especially as it relates with his father, who essentially let the boys raise themselves. He wasn't there for them emotionally. He couldn't really say anything about them personally. It was always from a very impersonal, disembodied perspective, talking about science and rockets and stuff like that. So I think I've had enough of this conversation with this guy. It gets really spicy, it gets really heated later on, but I'm not going to obviously cover the whole 1 hour, close to 2 hour conversation. So I'm just going to end it here. But it does shed a whole light into, the myth that Elon is trying to create around himself, being a self-made man, and all those things. Though he rode on the wealth, on the influence that his father had, and that's contributed to what he's become today. So, guys, that's the show for today. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in another live stream. It's bye for now.